So I thought I'd read a bit from the very start so that you guys, it doesn't need too much explanation. And then I'll read a little bit more from the middle. So I'm going to do my first reading now. As it happens, my name is Glass. My mother cut a deal with my father. If I was to get his surname, she would pick my forename. Perhaps yearning for the abandoned country of her birth, she decided on a solid German name, a hero's name, and so they called me Gunther. I've come to wonder whether I'll make it through my 23rd year. In the 9 months since my mother died, I started a new job, which led me to meet a number of new people, one of whom I killed in a misunderstanding. But other things happened in the first 22 years that I should explain first. My first years, as you might imagine, were unremarkable. I went through all the usual phases: vegetable, 0 to 1, animal, 1 to 4, memorable, 4+. I looked down on my early childhood as a time when I didn't know many words and couldn't put things in categories. The benefit of this was that almost everything came as an epiphany. A gloopy substance. Tasted nice, light changed colour through it, it was sticky, stuck to the cap. The downside was that I had to formulate rules for behaviour, such as, one is only allowed honey sometimes, when, and do not pour honey on the cap. It seems to me now, though it wasn't apparent at the time, that growing up is the forfeit of one's pure experience in return for the comfort and reliability of rules. I would say that we had a happy family. I mean, Dad's not the sort of person to actually say that he's happy, and obviously if you picked a day at random, his strong likelihood was that there'd be some kind of disturbance or argument. But the important thing was that it was always replaced by a different one the next day, so it didn't turn into a feud. Apparently there weren't any arguments before Max was born, but that was only a year after I was born, so I can't remember. I can't think that I would have caused any. I should explain something about my brother. People assume that because he's deaf, he can't be a bad person. But his being deaf is completely unrelated to the fact that he's a total bastard. Whenever it gets too much, I close my eyes and think to myself, you'll never hear music. And then I feel bad for him. And I suspect that other people do something similar, and this is why he gets away with being such a bastard. But I know what you're thinking, surely he wasn't always such a bastard. Maybe there was an event in his childhood that made him lash out at the people who cared about him, and maybe before this event there existed a pre-bastard Max. Well, let's have a look at the evidence. When I was 4 and he was 3, he managed to get hold of some scissors and cut my comfort blanket up into neat confetti. When I was 5 and he was 4, he put Lego under my sheets and in my shoes and everywhere he thought they might cause me discomfort. When I was 9 and he was 8, he woke up early and unscrewed the inside door handle of our shared bedroom before shutting me in. I thought I was stuck in some inescapable nightmare, and needing the toilet very badly resorted to escaping through the ground floor window, only to find that he'd also locked the back door. The cat appeared, staring at my bare feet in pyjamas as if to say, you too. In return for these human rights abuses, I had the privilege of sitting with Mum every time we took a family trip to the hospital. Dad would go in with Max, and Mum would sit with me in the waiting room, where there was an abacus and some other toys I was too old for. When we arrived, there was always a gang of 2 or 3 children playing with them who would tell me to go away. Once I remember distinctly I was called Fatty Fats McNugget. I suppose I didn't really mind being outlawed though. If Mum was there, I'd sit on her lap and help with her word search. The fact it was always my mother that looked after me during these long waits confirmed my instinct that my mother and I got on the best. Though the rules weren't stated, we wouldn't speak sign in the waiting room, and we wouldn't talk about Max. Lots of people love their mothers, but I think it's fair to say that I loved mine more than you love yours. When I was very young, it felt as if we were still one person, as if my every need were preempted by her. Nestled in close, I could hold her and have her arms surround me, and almost feel that she still carried me through the world. We'd been separated, of course, but I was still a part of her. If I ventured out into the world at all, it was on her behalf, as an extension of her. And I'd always report back on the things I'd seen and done, the knowledge I'd collected to share with her. Sometimes to help me in my job of bringing the world to her. She'd tell me things that she already knew, things that would help me understand what I was seeing and doing. And even though I got things wrong, and I never knew the right thing to say, and I sometimes forgot to put socks between my feet and my shoes, she loved me. She wasn't pretending either. She liked to look at me. She thought my jokes were funny, even or especially if they didn't make sense. As we grew older, I wanted to reach a balance point in our relationship, where I might also look after her. But I never got that far. Even in the end, I had no way to comfort her, as she had comforted me. So, just to break up the two readings, I'm going to read a very brief, in honour of the poets here, I'm going to read one of the two poems I've ever written. It's a little prose poem called A Visitor. And when the light came, the darkness was confused and flew under the skirting. We tried to get it out with a broom handle and a ruler, but it was like the time my friend's room was infested with ladybirds which bred like ladybirds in her wainscot. I made others leave and tried to coax it out. We talked about everything, the moon and space and where the darkness wanted to be when it grew up, but it still hugged the insulation between the walls like a blanket. Eventually, we left it and went back to the lounge, pretending not to hear its gentle sobbing. Later, when I returned to my room, it was sitting wearily hunched on my bed, waiting for me. Hello, I said. Hello, it said. So I'm just going to read, this is my last reading, and it's, Gunther he's just been given a job in London, so he's decided he wants to be a window cleaner. He gets headhunted to clean skyscrapers in London, and he needs to find somewhere to live. He ends up cleaning the Shard, but he has quite a job trying to find somewhere to live, so he buys a copy of The Loot, and then he finds that pretty much there's nothing going, and the least weird flat share situation is one where he doesn't have to pay rent, but he does have to do a lot of cleaning, and there's a living landlord. It was one of those cold, damp mornings that follows heavy rain, and I pulled my cagoule about me as I exited London Field Station and started in the direction of the flat. People were pushing prams, groups of hooded men hunched in doorways. A lot of people seemed to be cycling here, perhaps because the tube didn't service the area. Despite the name of the rail station, it seemed completely different to the London I knew. People were dressed as if for an Edwardian carnival, with bright lipstick, furs, strongmen moustaches, and horizontally striped vests abounding. I tried to check my map, but I had no data, so my blue dot had turned grey and was still hovering around the station. I flagged down a passerby whose woolly hat, sleeves, and trousers were all rolled up. His t-shirt sported a printed simulacrum of a double-breasted cardigan, and he was wearing a four-finger ring or knuckle duster on his right hand, which said T-A-W-T. "What's up, fella?" he asked, sniffing sharply. "I'm just trying to find this block of flats." I showed him the red drawing pin on my phone map. "Oh, easy squeezy, fella." He pointed behind him. "You want to go down Mare Stream, then pop a right on Paragon?" "That's very helpful, thank you." "No worries, fella. Love that working class hero thing you got going on, by the way, trade pro." He ran off for a few paces before splaying his legs and lifting his toes, rolling away on his wheeled trainers. I was beginning to worry that I might not fit in here as I ascended the stairs, but the flat was 7 floors up, which I took as a good omen. I got to the plain white door. There was no letterbox, no knocker and no doorbell. There was only an old hole for a deadlock and a thin metal rod propped up against the plain doormat. Several months' worth of unopened letters sat outside in a scattered pile. I knocked on the door, which gave a muffled thud, but to no avail. I cast around. I needed to find a new home, and I was buggered if I was going to turn away now. After about half an hour of knocking and looking for alternative entrances, a neighbour came out of our house with a big hemp bag full of laundry. When she saw me, she gave a nod of recognition and came over. She picked up the white rod, threaded it through the deadlock, stuck her tongue out as she jiggled the rod around. I heard an old-fashioned doorbell sound from within. She replaced the rod. "You'll have to indulge him. He's a bit." She tapped herself on the temple. "Nice though," she said, as if I might take offence. Before anyone could answer, she scuttered off. The door swung violently open, and I was confronted by a haggard and hairy face with eyes protruding so far that I thought they might escape their host. He stared at me for a second, then he receded into the fat, past the second front door, which had a doorbell with scratch marks around it. The whole of this antechamber was upholstered with corkboard, including the doors. I felt like I might be entering a wine bottle. Past the second door, I entered into a relatively normal kitchen-cum-living room. There were no windows, but there was a bright lamp in the corner which shone on an ivy plant that was growing on one side of the fridge. On the fridge were hundreds of tourist magnets, decrying Cyprus, the birthplace of Aphrodite, or Miotra ila Ethibitha. I couldn't imagine the man that had opened the door ever going anywhere that he might tan, and strongly suspected that the magnets had originated with the previous owner of the fridge, but they did add a homely touch. Some of the furniture was paint-stained, and there were empty bottles everywhere, and regular routes of the room's occupant were mapped out in geometries of dust. On one side of the room was a vast bookshelf, filled with hardbound volumes in various languages. A flotilla of post-it notes bobbed between pages, under the breeze of a wall-mounted fan. "To keep the books from dust," said the haggard man. His voice was gravelly with a hint of an accent that I couldn't place, and won't do now to the embarrassment of anyone. "You were here about the room." "Yes, that's right, Kunta, pleased to meet you." He bared his yellow teeth. It was a smile which I felt was designed to affront, and yet I found myself reassured. There was an honesty there which was missing in the more charming smile of my boss. It was a smile that said, "I'm forcing you to take me as I am." And I was inexplicably touched that he'd invited me in before he knew who I was. "This is my contact room. As you can see, there are all of the things which you would expect in a house. A fridge, a sofa, a toilet. There was indeed a urinal hanging casually from the wall which had been graffitied with the name Armut 1917. "My retirement fund," he said mercurially. He led me through to a second room which was also lined floor to ceiling with corkboard. There was no light but for a small gas lamp. Pillows were plumped up on the bed which was moulded into the negative of a sitting man, and leaves of paper were strewn about the room. The air was thick and cloying. I suspected that the room had not been cleaned for a long time. "This is where I write for 6 days a week. Fridays are my days of contact. I come out for other things, such as placing orders for books or washing myself." There were a number of fish skeletons on plates around the room which must have been contributing to the unusual pungency. "You will not come in here, except for Fridays." We went back to the first room. "What are you writing?" I asked. "For many years I've been writing a guide to living, an essential guide, nothing extraneous. But it is difficult," he said sadly. "Life obscures my effort." He stroked the corkboard on the wall fondly as one might a beloved pet. "I must have silence for my writing. I must not have any sign of our frivolous modernity in my room. It would be too distracting. I must not hear planes or traffic. Above all, there must be darkness. Darkness is the friend of thought. We are no more than animals, you see. We must be in darkness, to awaken our animal instincts for danger and preservation, to awaken our desire to see and not be seen." "I see. Do you?" he asked, searching my watering eyes. At such proximity, his halitosis was like a punch on the nose. "You don't like being distracted," I summarized. "It's very pleasant to be distracted, but one cannot capture life while living it. It's like trying to understand the oceans while you are drowning." I'd have thought drowning would be the most efficient way to become better acquainted with the sea, but I let it go. He moved off to another room and I followed. In the third room there was a large window. There were no furnishings except for a plain white futon. The window was open and sun glided in like a paper aeroplane to rest on the plain wooden floor. The lampshade was a paper globe similar to traditional Japanese lights. I have fitted this in the manner of a normal capitalist IKEA customer, he said proudly. Do you like it? It's very nice. Good, then you must move in today, otherwise next Friday. He handed me 2 keys. This is for the front door and this is for the other front door. He smiled at me again. I didn't catch your name, I said. I didn't give it, he said. Every person calls me the Steppenwolf. It is a little joke we have. You do not know to what I refer. Is it because you look a bit like a wolf? Do you not read the great German novelists, or our philosophers, Schopenhauer, perhaps, Kant? Don't really read any books, I'm afraid. You are German, though. Verstehen Sie Deutsch? I said. Go and get your things. If you must contact me, I have a telephone. Although I have disabled the bell, so I must guess if it is ringing. He ushered me out the door and I found myself back out on the street without his number, his real name, or any details of the tenancy. I knew I didn't want to spend another night in the hostel, so I suppose I'd just have to check out and hope for the best. Not wanting to get straight back on the train, I decided to have a quick coffee in the ride-through pop-up cycle cafe near the station. Inside, there was a man sitting behind the counter and a couple of customers sitting around in lycra. The man behind the counter wore a very low-cut vest, and across his bare chest I could see a tattoo of 2 swallows fighting over an anchor. Though at first he appeared to be talking to himself, I could see an earphone cord trailing down under his long, flowing beard. And I was like, well, I'm going to Alibi, and he was like, FOMO, and I was like, YOLO, no phone, he was all like, F a number, anyway, gotta go, I've got a customer. He pressed his headset button. How can I help you, princess? Just a coffee, please. To park or right away? Takeaway, please? He sized me up. We only do flat whites, is that okay? Sure, it's fine. We just free pour the stretched milk. You can't customize it. I smiled at him. Eventually, he smoothed down his moustache before printing out a receipt which included a service charge and sliding it to me on a porcelain plate not unlike our nice set at home. Another customer rode in, carefully dismounting his penny farthing and parking it in the spare bay. Cycling is very popular here, I said as he made the coffee. It's the only way to travel, he said. Go fast, get fit, no carbon footprint. Apart from the carbon that you eat. It's basically about saving the planet. By the time our kids grow up, they'll be like, what's a bike here? They'll be travelling by pedalo. You ride? I do occasionally when I find this time, when it's nice weather. I'm sorry, but that's not good enough. You have to minimise your impact. But you sell your coffee in disposable cups, I said. The customer experience is very important to us, he said coldly, handing me my cup.